This is A New Angle, conversations about how we're doing and where we're going. I'm your host, Justin Angle. This show is supported by the Headwaters Foundation, First Security Bank, and the University of Montana College of Business. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today, I'm speaking with David Spear and Julie Cajune of A Voice, Art, Vision, and Outreach in Community Education. This nonprofit organization's mission is to foster individual, group, community, and cultural expression through art, outreach, and education. A Voice has served the Flathead Nation for 20 years. Julie, David, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
So tell us, where did you grow up and what did your parents do? Julie, let's start with you.
Well, I'm a tribal member of the tribal citizen, my lawyer friends would say. We are a sovereign nation, so that makes me a citizen. I'm a citizen of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. So born and raised there, grew up there. My mother was a social worker. I come from kind of a matriarchal family of service people. And a lot of the older generation, my mom's and hers before her, were involved in tribal government. My Nunu Meh, my uncle, was Bearhead Sweeney, kind of a well-known activist for environmental causes. And so my mom's colorful brother. And so I grew up, in a really large Salish extended family on the reservation. And we were kind of raised with the idea that it's a value that you have a generational responsibility. You have a generational responsibility to make a contribution to the world, to your community. So we kind of grew up with that value in our family that we were supposed to do something good and meaningful and important in some way. And so my family, my sisters are scholars and addiction counselors, social workers, things like that. So I became a teacher. I decided to teach and taught in a bilingual program the first 3 years in Ronan. Taught a high school Native Studies class. Teaching high school was a really big eye-opener for me.
I bet it was, yeah.
And then got into developing tribal history materials because it was kind of when they were revisiting the constitutional language of Montana.
Okay. That
says the state of Montana is committed in its educational endeavors to preserve and promote the cultural integrity of Native people. That's a paraphrase, obviously. But when they were revisiting that into the law that is now known as Indian Ed for All. And so I was a young teacher and did a curriculum for a traveling exhibit from Washington State University, Sacred Encounters, about the Jesuits meeting with the Salish people.
Okay.
And then that kind of steered me towards developing materials. And then the fact that there weren't any tribally specific materials.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of in the right place at the right time. And so, 35 years later, that's kind of what I've been doing. So I'm winding down. I'm winding that down. But worked in schools for about 10 years at home.
Excellent. David, how about you?
I call myself a carpetbagger out here.
Okay. Yeah.
The fact that I'm working on the res. And
a welcome one.
Well, it turns out that I was, I'm the child of parents, both who were working people. My mom was a registered nurse. My father was an Episcopal priest of all things. And I think one of the things that had an impact on me very young is that they decided that they wanted to move to Panama. When we were really young, there were 5 of us. My sister was, in fact, born in Panama. And my dad went down there to be, if you will, a priest in action, to take on a group of people that he didn't know. And when we went down there, my mom worked for the government hospital there. And it turns out that my dad's parish, if you will, the people that he was serving, were all people of color. So it was during segregation, and we lived on the white side of town. There was literally a line that ran through the middle, and we lived on the white side, went to the white school. But we would cross the line, and when we would go and worship, we would worship with all our friends, and we were literally the only white people in our church. And so that had an impact on me just in terms of culture, when my parents would go away for the weekend, they would leave us with their friends in the church and not with folks on the white side, if you will. So I didn't really understand all that at the time because I was in 4th grade when we moved back to the States. But it had an impact in terms of my interest in wanting to sort of learn and be part of places that I might not necessarily have been placed in.
Yeah.
And so we moved back, and my dad took a job in a factory town, Danbury, Connecticut, and was a parish priest there for a couple decades. My mom went to work in geriatric nursing and worked with elderly people, that kind of thing. My photography came out of high school. I was actually a very quiet student, but I was very interested in things. But my teachers oftentimes thought that I was not focused or I wasn't interested. And it turns out that I had to take photography class in my senior year because I was in the bottom quarter of my graduating class. I needed the 3 credits to graduate. And it was one of those things, and I walked into the darkroom for the first time, and I saw an image coming up in the developer, and I said, well, I think I can do this.
That was for you.
That was for me. And so, and teaching actually was never on my list. I was kind of intimidated by teachers because they didn't kind of reach out and understand who I was, even though I was thinking about a lot of stuff. So it turns out that I really gravitated to photography. I went to California and studied photography, learned how it worked, and was really just doing it in a lot of ways for myself and just because I was just happy with it and engaged in being out in the world and wanting to make pictures about things. And it turns out that the school I went to was very commercial, and it was sort of one of those things. They were training photographers to be, Main Street portrait photographers, or at the time the terminology was industrial photographers, people who would go and work for big companies and that kind of thing. And I realized I didn't really want to do that. And so, interestingly, I came to Montana after I finished my school, and I actually left school about a semester before I was going to graduate, to my parents' dismay. And it was just because that school I had, the offering at that school at that time just wasn't fitting me. And I came to Montana.
Yeah, let's pause on that part because not many people make the New York City to Polson swap.
Right.
Tell us about that. Why Polson? What was drawing you in there?
Well, it turns out that a friend of mine came down to visit me in Santa Barbara where I was studying.
Okay.
And he had come straight from Connecticut there. He came down to visit me and said, you got to see this place. You got to check this out. And he was thinking of it from a visual context, but also from a cultural context. He said this was stuff that us being raised in Connecticut had never experienced before.
Yeah,
I'd never seen before.
Yeah. Okay.
So I came up here and I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. I ended up in Missoula, and my student loans were coming in. I had to start paying my student loans 6 months after I left school.
Indeed.
And so I went to all the studios in Missoula at the time and pitched them. I said, well, I can come and work for your studio, but they're all one-person operations at the time. And so they decided I just couldn't find work. And so I ended up going back to New York and took a job as a commercial portrait photographer.
Okay.
And I retired my debt, but in the summer times I would come out here and photograph.
Got it. Okay.
And I would sort of connect. And it turns out that the first time I drove through Glacier Park, I was like, it took me hours just to make each turn, just to stop and photograph, stop and photograph, and stop and photograph, and that kind of thing. And I started to learn a little bit about the people on the east side of the mountains, the Blackfeet, and I didn't know much about the Flathead, reservation at that point. But I decided that I wanted, and I kept coming out here. And so after I retired my loans, I moved back out here full time in 1976, and I rented an apartment in Columbia Falls because I wanted to be close to the park to be able to photograph.
Okay.
And it turns out that I was selling prints at local art fairs. I was publishing work. There was a small publication called The Borrowed Times, which was kind of an alternative newspaper back at that point. And I went in and pitched them, and I essentially kind of became their unofficial photographer for a period of time. And then in 1978, 79, I was reading through Popular Photography magazine, and I saw this advertisement in the paper, and it was the International Center of Photography, and they were saying, if you're someone who's been doing some photography, we would want to come back and work on your own work. We have this internship program that you might be interested in. So I applied and got into that.
Okay.
And what I was really thinking about at that point in time was what I hadn't learned in my studies in Santa Barbara was that I didn't know about the history of photography. I didn't really know much about documentary photography. And ICP was the crown of documentary photography. I mean, Robert Capa, who was the preeminent Second World War photographer, his brother actually started the museum. And he started to collect pictures about wars with the idea that, well, if we're going to start another war, maybe we should look at what's happened before visually and maybe kind of try to discuss it. Or maybe, and obviously not a lot happened in that way to make things better necessarily, but there is an archive and there are evidence of things that had happened. And so I ended up in that program for 2 years. And then as soon as I finished, they said, we want to offer you a job. And they offered me a job in the museum. And the museum was on the Upper East Side. It was a one-family mansion that was built in 1917 by Willard Straight and Dorothy Whitney. And the whole museum fit in. That's how big the building was. And Cornell trusted photographers more than he trusted a 24-hour guard service. So what he did is he would always have someone, a photographer person, live in the building. And so they invited me to live in the building. And most people took that job for about a year or two, and I ended up being there for almost 20 years.
Wow.
And the reason I stayed was that two things occurred. One was I was really learning about photography at that point. I was really learning about the kinds of things that I wanted to photograph. And every 6 weeks there was a new exhibition, and photographers from around the world were coming in with incredible work about what was going on in culture and society. And at the same time, Cornell came up to me and he said, well, he ended up having me be his house photographer, which sounded glamorous, but essentially what it was I was taking handshaking and smiling pictures at openings and copying photographs of other photographers.
Sure.
And he came up to me one day and he said, we're a new museum, relatively speaking. And he said, maybe you could do something that you could leave a legacy for, something we haven't done before. And I was actually standing on the corner of 96th Street looking into East Harlem, which was one of the poorest neighborhoods. Museum was literally 2 blocks away in one of the oldest, richest neighborhoods. And I thought to myself, this is maybe where we should do something. And it was coincidental. There was a social studies teacher in a school 10 blocks north in East Harlem who said, maybe we should go to that photography museum and do something with them. And we ended up building a program. And so we built what was called the ICP Community Outreach Program. We got funding. I was in the East Harlem program for 11 years in their school and working with them and having young people photograph themselves and their culture and their people. East Harlem was one of the places where a lot of the new immigrants came. So there were a lot of Hispanic people. There were a lot of Asian people. There were a lot of different mixes of different cultures. And to have them photographing each other and kind of building on that kind of idea was something that became interested in. Again, I wasn't really thinking about teaching on my list, but that's kind of how that occurred.
So tell us about A Voice. What is it? How did it come to be? Yeah, give us the origin story, David.
Okay, well, the story was that my wife, Jill, who was from Polson, who I met in my trips coming out in between, I talked her to coming back to New York before we were married, and then we were married, and she was actually really active in business stuff in New York. And we were at a point where we were thinking about moving. The museum was going to give up its position where you could live in the building, which made it possible for us to kind of operate there. And so she said, well, why don't we maybe take some of this programming out to Montana? She said, I went to Polson High School and there wasn't anything like this available in our neck of the woods.
Yeah.
And maybe we can come out and do something. So we did that. She came out here a year before I did because I was afraid of losing my income base. And so I came out, and it's coincidental too that Jill had a really context for here because she had tribal member friends, even though she's not tribal.
Okay.
Who she had a connection to and remembered from growing up. And so I came out here and I walked into Eagle River School and I made the pitch. I said, I'm this guy from New York. I'd like to work with your staff and the faculty and develop a program. And if you're interested, I'm not asking you for a job. If I can use your nonprofit status, we'll raise the money and we'll try to make it happen. And Clarice King, who was the superintendent at the time, said, yeah, come on in. And that's how it got started.
And Julie, when did you plug in? You're a board member.
Well,
what's your origin story with the organization?
Well, I hired David before he started at Two Eagle.
Okay.
And then, because I'm an educator, I've worked with a lot of Two Eagle teachers and have had relatives that went there and have worked with David also while he's working there collaboratively with other youth programs. I did a summer youth program for a couple of years when I was the director of the Tribal Education Department. And for me, it's giving young people, I'm interested in young people getting an opportunity to expand their idea of the world and how they see it and how they might fit in and what they might do. And when I worked in an administrative role, I brought a lot of fine art people, mostly native fine art writers,
okay,
classical pianists, violinists, all kinds of people, because the schools offer kind of a meager curriculum. And I'm not saying that to disparage what they're doing, but it's a budget issue.
It's a challenge.
It's a
schools
challenge
across the
and
country.
so,
Yeah.
you know, whatever language you get might be whatever language the social studies teacher
Sure.
has or someone else has, and so it's pretty limited. So I was for about 6 years bringing in a lot of different people in the arts for young people, and just watching how young people responded to it, and how it opened up a different world to them, you know. And the idea of image making in arts is different. It's soul work, I think.
Yeah.
Besides intellectual, it's also soul work, and I think young people really need that. And then the idea of kids at home, young people at home, imaging their world, which is really, this is who we are, identifying themselves, because Native people obviously have been the subjects of images from the outside in. And it's very interesting to me to see what young people do and how they see the world. And I've had favorite projects that David's done. The Pink Dress Project was a favorite because those dresses passed around to different groups of young women. And David can describe how that, I don't even know how that happened, but looking at some of the photographs of young women with this pink gown on, an expensive designer gown, and then their traditional regalia together, what they did with that and how they imaged each other, I thought was fascinating. Some of the students I had when I was working at as an administrator then went to David's program and got an opportunity to show their work other places, to travel. He's taken kids to New York. He's taken kids to New Mexico and different places. And it's just expanding what young people think is possible for them, that there's more than, you know, this narrow, we get into these narrow windows of what I can do to make a living or how I can care for myself.
Yes.
And I think sometimes it's prohibiting, and we miss a lot of amazing things that young people could do and potential that they could do. And I was really wanting kids to think I could be a writer, or I could be an image maker, you know, or I could be a musician, or
could express myself in my culture in some way.
And the power of self-expression, where there isn't a right or wrong, and nobody's telling you what you have to do, where you are the one empowered to do that, it is really priceless for young people. And I saw that as a teacher, and then as an administrator when I was working with other teachers, how powerful that can be. Those are the things that young people remember from being in school. It's I'm sorry, it's not the earth science curriculum.
Yeah, and a lot of the
I don't want to say that,
no,
but
the traditional curriculum sometimes, I think suppress might be too strong a word, but it makes that a self-expression difficult.
We forget that we're all of these parts, that we're spiritual people, that we're heart people, that we're soulful people, and we attend to the intellect. Maybe we forget that part of learning, and it's so much a part of learning.
Yeah.
And I think young people are hungry for that. And David is patient and skilled and amazing at doing that with young people. I watched him. I hired him for a group of kind of rowdy middle school kids who felt disenfranchised. So I went in and watched him. You know, I didn't just send him, you know, I wanted to go in and see how he did. He's really remarkable because he is kind and gentle, and young people learn to trust him.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by, you mentioned, David, that you showed up, you give the pitch, and here we are, you know, several decades later. But, you know, a guy from New York drops in to the reservation community and wants to start a school program. I mean, any scenario, that's going to take a building of trust. How are you able to build trust in that community such that they would bring you in and enable you to share a set of skills and a vision for self-expression?
Well, it was always that idea of back to Panama. I was very comfortable in the context of whoever I was with.
Okay.
And that set up and also because I was a quiet student and was thought to be not interested. So when I walk into a room, I want to know who I want to know why that kid is quiet.
Oh, you can see that. Yeah, you can see those kids.
I want to know. And coincidentally, I worked with one of the tribal members, Jennifer Finley. She and I have collaborated on projects, and she's a poet.
Okay.
So when Jennifer and I go in together, what would happen is that Jennifer was always told when she was around, you could never be a writer. You can't do that. And what happened was that when we walked in as a team, she would go to the brightest kid in the class, and I would go to the quietest kid in the class. And in the collaboration, we would be able to kind of affect everyone. But I just wanted to know, and I remember being in New York in East Harlem on the first day of class, and I'm sitting in front of the essentially Hispanic African-American young people, and they're looking at me, what's this white guy's intention?
Yeah.
And that's a legitimate question, because based on what happens, abusive things, everything that happens in culture is real, and that's a real question. I remember my student coming up to me, his name is Eris Mende, he was a Dominican young man, and he came up to me and he said, what are you going to do if I drop this camera that you just handed me? And so he was wanting my reaction, and I said, well, I hope you won't drop it, but I'm hoping that you'll maybe make some pictures about who you are with
Yeah,
me.
don't drop it, use it, right?
It's the long story short about Eris Mende was that he remembers that, and he and his, it was like the substitute teacher walking into class, and we're going to pick on that person for all kinds of reasons. And he and I are actually still friends. He's actually a New York NYPD cop.
Wonderful.
And we have a relationship that goes on, and he actually came out here and talked to our students at Two Eagle, and it was one of those things that Julie was describing, that if we have an opportunity to let someone express themselves, and Eris Mende wasn't a big shooter, but he was really fascinated about being in the darkroom. Yeah. He loved to get his hands wet. He loved processing film. He loved that idea of process. And so photography offers a lot of different options in terms of what a young person might be able to grab onto.
So I want to say something about trust that David's not going to say, that I can say. I'm a board member. Okay. And I've worked with David and known what he does. One of the things that David did different is that he raised funding. And I've had a lot of people come to me after they've written a grant, and now they need a Native person to work with them because they wrote that into the grant. And then I always look at how those funds are spent, and is it building capacity in our community, or is it just advancing what this individual wants to do? Is it a true benefit? And that's something that has never been an issue with David, because the money he raises goes directly to services for kids and equipment for kids. He is not gaining any wealth or building a retirement portfolio in this work. He and his wife Jill have been really remarkably generous in how any money that they have been able to gather through grants or any private donation has gone directly to serve kids. And that's not common. Yeah. That's not common, and right away that's going to build trust. Two Eagle has benefited from David being there without a cost to them. Yeah. So it's pretty unique how he's come in and worked in our community.
Indeed. And at the center of that is the trust, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about some of the programs. You mentioned the Pink Dress Project. Yes. David, talk us through some of the, maybe pick one or two projects that you're particularly excited about over the last decade or so.
Well, I was driving in this morning. There's a big billboard on the highway of a picture of Jermaine Charlo, who went missing back in 2017. Mm-hmm. And I think about that picture a lot because Jermaine was a student of ours. Oh. And she was also part of the Pink Dress Project. Mm-hmm. So 5 months before she went missing, we had this project that we developed with our collaborators in New York, where we, on the Lower East Side, the Lower East Side Girls Club had a director who was able to talk high-end designers into donating dresses. So she had all these dresses, and they would give them out to young people who couldn't afford prom dresses, and they had all these pink dresses left over. And the idea was that Lynn said, well, we just had our kids photograph each other out on the street with pink dresses. Yeah. And she said, what would you think about the idea if we sent them to you? Would you do it on the res? And I said, yeah. Mm-hmm. So we did it on the res. And Jermaine was part of that project and photographed by her friend, Danielle. Okay. And then we sent them to LA, and we sent them to Chiapas, Mexico. And then we did this big show that showed all the young people in these different places, not only in the dresses, but being photographed by each other. It has a really powerful kind of ring, just in terms of its intention and what it did, and also showing location and culture in different places and kind of connecting to that. So we're really open to looking for collaborations like that. I think a voice is a great thing, and we can there's all this talk about David's this great guy, comes in and does all this stuff, but we don't do anything any better without collaboration. I mean, collaboration is the whole key. And one thing I'll say about Julie's talking about me being on the res, what people don't understand is that I get from the reservation and from the people who I serve here as much as I'm giving. So it's a reciprocal relationship. It's not like it's about David's this good guy doing all this great stuff. It's about how we do this together.
Yeah, what comes forth in your web materials and other publicity that the organization has gained is this is about the work that the kids are producing. This isn't about promoting your own photography and your own story. This is the work of the children is front and center and really compelling. Talk about this book that you're trying to publish. You brought in this beautiful book and shared it with me when we started talking. This has been a long journey, and hopefully you're going to have something large scale to produce shortly.
Right. So our game plan, 10 years into the project, I raised the money to publish a book, and the reason the book was the thing that occurred was that I was querying families in the community, like what would be something, we have this archive of work of young people, here's your community by your kids, and what would be the best way for us to show that and to save it? And they said, let's do a coffee table book.
Coffee table.
And I am a little bit dyslexic, which you just picked up on. And I've been, from a traditional photography standpoint, I was thinking, well, that's kind of like how Ansel would have done it, or that's how, but it was something that they resonated with. And so I raised the money, and Jill and I raised the money, and we published 3,000 copies of the book. It was a 100-page book with 66 photographs, a couple texts in it. And we took the advice of someone in the community about who to print with, and we worked on it. We did the layout, we did the whole thing, and we sent it off. And I remember the day the books arrived at our studio space, and I just was so excited that they were here. I started moving them aside, and I didn't even open it until halfway into it. I opened up, and I just realized that the quality wasn't there.
Right.
And so they tried to say that it was our fault, it was our scans, and we really wanted to have a high quality thing that would represent everything. And so I never released the book because I didn't want the stigma of the bad printing to fall on our young people's work, because the work was strong. So we've been thinking about that since then, and what we've done is we've actually redesigned the book. So we're going to include everything that was in the first book that we've done, and we've also added 100 pages. And it's interesting from a technical standpoint, the transition happened that we were doing black and white analog film photography for the first 10 years, and then digital's come in. And so now the second half is essentially digital work and color work, and we've added a lot more text, a lot more of the students' language and stories and that kind of thing. And
when will this book be available? Where can folks find it?
So, it's actually going to be, what we're trying to do is we're trying to raise money to print 10,000 copies.
Okay.
And our goal is to give a free copy to every tribal member, and also to put a copy in every public and tribal school in the state.
Wonderful.
And so that everyone else around, young people, can kind of see what's going on there. And it's actually probably not going to be for sale. It's not a commercial venture. So the idea is that we have to kind of raise the money to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And Julie, when she came on our board, when we were talking about that, she said, that's one thing we got to get going.
Yeah. So Julie, I have a question for you. A Voice has a really rich Instagram feed. And I was looking through that the other day, and there's a picture of a young man who looks to be holding up, it's a portrait of a young man who looks to be holding a report card or some sort of a progress report or some document from school. And you can see in hand scripted language at the bottom, keep coming to school. Looks like a statement from a teacher. And it got me thinking that a voice and the artistic sensibility, the self-expression, this has to be a mechanism to create community connection. But like, what role does it play in keeping folks coming to school, keeping them engaged? Hopefully that's a big part of the plot as well.
It is. And student dropout issues in Montana, in rural communities, they've been big. And when I worked as the Indian Ed director, I tracked it. And Indian students always dropped out at a higher rate than non-Indian students. And oftentimes, and students were transient from one school to another.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes, there were a lot of contributing issues, and sometimes it was not one teacher connecting with them. Kids need one person.
Sure.
And I've done tons of staff development with teachers. And the Search Institute has a longitudinal research study of what we already know, that relationships is at the heart of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when we're in the classroom, we forget that. And so I think both David's manner of teaching and what he's doing, empowering kids, it's a reason to go to school that maybe they didn't have with other teachers or in other subject areas. For some kids at sports, and then I've seen students, I've known students, when the season is over, they're gone.
Oh yeah. I mean, but whatever creates that connective tissue is so powerful.
Yeah, and it can be transformative, and I say that in not in a very serious way, that it can be transformative for a young person to be able to get through school, and it's it's part of a better path for them, and it can change their life in so many different ways. So I'm privileged to be a board member with David and his other great board members. He's got a really nice, creative, fabulous team of people, from lawyers to other image makers. George Price, who was a professor here for quite a while, retired from here. He's on the board. So it's a group of really good souls who are committed to support young people in something different, in being creative and maybe finding a different way.
So we're celebrating 20 years of the organization. You mentioned this book effort. Let's shine a light on the future. What are your hopes and dreams for the next 20 years?
Well, we're going to go the opposite. We're going to go bigger and bigger. We actually our latest idea is to actually build a youth center in Pablo.
Wonderful.
And the reason we want to build a youth center there was that one of our former students who I met the first day that Julie hired me is a postal worker across the street. And they built a skate park about a year and a half ago. And Tyra, who is the person I'm talking about, saw all these kids out there. And she said, David, when you get old and frail, can my husband and I buy your building so we can build a community center for kids in Pablo? Because the kids in Pablo can't get to Ronan, to the Boys Girls Club, or they can't get to Polson. And I said, well, I want to be in my space for a little bit longer, but why don't we work on it now? So one of our big plans is we want to build a community center there that would be something that's right there by the bridge in the school and be accessible to those kids, because they can't kind of get into other stuff.
And what resources would you want in that community center? If you could just mock up the design right now, what are your hopes and dreams?
we would build a center where the students could come anytime, any day of the week. We would have everything available to them. One of the things that Julie and I have noticed in some of the community centers that are around the area is that one thing that they don't focus as much on is programming for students, educational opportunities. So let's put in a sound studio. Let's put in a digital lab. Let's put in, let's have the tools that are available in other public schools and other places around the country here. Because again, what we're finding from our programs, and the young man who you spoke about in the photograph, he's holding up that piece of paper and he graduated a week later.
Oh my gosh, amazing.
Okay. So just to let you know that we are able to see the results of what occurs in the context of that. Yeah. And Little Ray McDonald is his name, and he was someone who had a lot of issues with being in school and that kind of thing. But photography drew him in, and what he did is he was able to create a series of pictures, which we're actually going to do a show of his work at the community college, or the Salish Kootenai College, actually. Yeah. And he talks about it. He said, it's kind of like the Arismendi, the Dominican young man I spoke about. There was something that drew him in and something that he grabbed onto. And Ray loves to do these fantastic, like, coloring, crazy color pictures. Yeah. All right. But when we were taking pictures of him in front of his work with the other students, he said, "This is my picture, David. This is what I want to show." Okay. So the long way around your question is we've one of the other issues that we're working on is we've talked a lot about it, is that we're also dealing with some of the social issues. So I've lost at least one student every year to suicide while I've been teaching there. So that's become a very personal and very, very difficult and undefined thing. The difference between New York, living here, and working in New York, and I would go in the community and leave. I'm actually living in the community, so everything that occurs in the community, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, is part of our experience. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to work on a project that's focusing on suicide, actually, a storytelling project. Yeah. And so we have interviews and things we've been working on. I'm not talking a lot about it because we don't want to talk about something before it's completed, but to say that when you were asking about the idea of funding, we want to hire an artist to be able to illustrate some of those things. We want to be able to use resources from the community by people who are from the community to be able to, have them tell their stories in different ways and more contemporary ways. And it's really an important thing because the tribes, as you know, are storytellers. Yeah. And so all we're trying to do is we're trying to put tools in place that they can use to become, just be able to do it better and to be able to do it more thoroughly and to include these kinds of ways of working in their work and the stories that they need to tell and share.
So, Julie, as a board member, one of your roles is to be a good steward of resources. Mm-hmm. If a listener wants to contribute to this effort, learn more about it, get involved, support some of the many projects David's mentioned, what would you suggest? Where would you direct them?
I would direct them to the website and to contact us personally, and we'd be happy to visit with people about the work and create a relationship with them.
Again, we're working on the book, so the book when we do the book, we'll also do a big. In fact, we're scheduled to be in that space probably in 2028. That's how much time we're taking to look ahead. Yep. But our website is very active. We actually built our website around the students' work and to honor that.
Yeah, it's beautiful and rich. Right. I suggest listeners check it out.
Yes, as well as the Instagram link, and that's more of a daily here's what's going on, here's what we're doing today kind of thing. So those are places that see it, and if people are interested, you can donate on our website. Mm-hmm. If you need one of us to come and talk to you, we'll be happy to talk to you. And if you're ever at Two Eagle River School, each term, and right now we have a brand new show 4 times a year that the students work. All their work is being generated and put on the walls. So it's a continually changing and a building thing. And this 20-year archive is something that George Price, when he was teaching at Two Eagle before he went on to his professorship, had an archive of work from when he taught photography there. And so we have this incredible archive, which I'm being very protective of, because in George's case, part of his archive was thrown away when the next person came in to teach. And so at some point, the tribes are going to build their big preservation center. And at that point, I'm going to literally walk these files across the street or wherever it's going to be and say, this is you. Yeah. This is who you guys are. And what it would be incredibly important for an Indigenous curators and Indigenous artists and history, art history people to go in and use that archive, because I'm very prejudiced. I pick out the pictures that I like, but there are layers and layers of stuff in that in terms of culture that are very, very, very valuable. Excuse me.
Indeed. So. Well, this has been a fantastic education in the great program and the great work that you both are engaged in. Thanks for coming down and sharing it with us, and best of luck. Hopefully listeners will make contributions and go and see the work and just engage. I love what you're doing with these students. Thanks so much for visiting with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Lem Lumsh.
Thanks for listening to A New Angle. If you like what we do and want to support us directly, please consider a subscription at anewanglepodcast.com. A New Angle is recorded at Studio 49, a generous gift from UM alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. Our presenting sponsor is the Headwaters Foundation, working side by side with Western Montanans to improve the health of our communities. We are also supported by First Security Bank and the University of Montana College of Business, with additional help from CED, Drum Coffee, and Montana Public Radio. Keely Larson is our producer. Libby Riddle is our production assistant. And finally, John Brownell, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks made our music. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.